The most dangerous wrath isn't the one that screams, but the one that waits patiently in the silence for the perfect moment. Experience the gripping tales of calculated revenge and the ultimate price of betrayal. Subscribe now and watch the silent storm finally break on screen.
The morning they filed the lawsuit, I was in a conference room in Brussels. Not that anyone in my family knew that. Not that anyone in my family knew much of anything about where I'd been for the last 8 years. To them, I was the daughter who left, the sister who never called back, the one who moved to Washington and came home less and less until she stopped coming home at all. My brother had a theory about why. He shared it freely at dinners, at church, at the grain co-op where our father used to hold court with the other men who'd worked the same land for 40 years. His theory was that I was ashamed, that I'd gone to the city thinking I was better than all of them, failed at whatever mysterious thing I was supposedly doing and was too proud to admit it. I let him believe that. It was easier than the truth. I grew up in a small town in eastern Ohio called Millhaven, population around 4,000, not counting the summer people who came for the lake. My father ran a hardware store on the main street until his knees gave out, and then my mother ran it, and then my brother took it over when she got sick. That's how things worked in Millhaven. You inherited what you were given and you made it work, or you left. I left. Not because I hated it. I want to be clear about that. I loved the smell of that store. Oil and wood dust and something metallic underneath it all, like the inside of a clock. I loved the way my mother knew every customer's name and what projects they had going on at home. I loved a creek behind our property where I used to read until my father called me in for dinner. But I was also the kind of person who read everything she could get her hands on, who applied for things she didn't tell her parents about, who drove 2 hours to Columbus for an interview when she was 22 and never told a soul until she had the offer in writing. The offer was from a federal agency. I was 23 when I started. I was 25 when I was given my first clearance upgrade. By 29, I was running a small team that I am still not able to describe in any specificity. What I can tell you is that I was good at it, and not being good at it required me to be, in many ways, invisible. My mother was diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's when I was 31. I flew home as often as I could, which wasn't often enough. My brother, I will call him what he always called himself, the one who stayed, made sure I knew the cost of every flight I missed. He texted me photos of her at doctor's appointments. He sent me a voicemail of her crying once on a bad day when her hands wouldn't cooperate. I don't think he meant it to be cruel. I think he genuinely believed that guilt was the same thing as accountability. What he didn't know was that I was sending money home. Not a little. Every month, a transfer from an account he didn't know about, routed through a mechanism I won't detail here, landing in my mother's personal account. She knew. We talked about it on calls he wasn't part of. She used it to cover her medications, her physical therapy copays, the new hospital bet that my brother had said they couldn't afford. She asked me once if I would tell him. I said someday. She died before someday arrived. She left a will. She'd had it drawn up quietly with a lawyer in Columbus without telling my brother or my father. She left the house to my father for his lifetime. She left the store to my brother because that was always going to be his. And she left her personal savings account, the one I'd been quietly filling for 3 years, to me. The balance was a little over $240,000. My brother's reaction, when the lawyer read it out, was very quiet. The kind of quiet that means something is building underneath. He hired an attorney within the week. The lawsuit alleged that I had manipulated our mother during a period of diminished capacity, that I had used her illness to gain access to her finances and drain her savings for my own benefit, that the transfers into her account were, in fact, transfers I had made from her account through fraudulent means, and that the money she left me was money I had stolen from her while she was too sick to notice. My brother signed every page of that complaint. My father, who I do not believe understood what he was signing, signed it too. I read the filing on my phone at midnight in a hotel room in Reykjavik. I did not sleep that night, not because I was scared, because I was trying to decide how to handle it. I hired a lawyer. Her name was Audra Finch, and she came recommended through channels I won't describe. She was from Cincinnati, wore her gray hair in a braid down her back, and spoke in a very quiet voice that made you lean in to hear her. She told me she'd handled cases like this before. She asked me a number of questions, then she asked me one more. Is there anything about your professional history that the court will need to understand in order to understand your financial behavior? I looked at her for a moment. Yes, I said. Will that create complications? It might, I said. But I have someone I can call. The trial was set for a Tuesday in March, in the Millhaven County Courthouse. It's a small building with wood paneling that hasn't been updated since 1987, and fluorescent lights that hum faintly through the whole proceedings. I'd been inside it once before, when I was 12, for a zoning dispute my father cared deeply about. I arrived early. I sat in the second row of the gallery and waited for things to begin. My brother came in with his attorney, a man named Strickland from Akron, who wore a suit that was slightly too large in the shoulders and had the look of someone who had prepared very thoroughly for a case he considered easy. My father came in behind them. He looked older than I remembered. He didn't look at me. The judge was a woman named Honorable Patricia Wexford. She was perhaps 60, with reading glasses she wore on a chain and the precise, practiced expression of someone who has presided over enough human mess that very little surprises her anymore. I did not know her. But Audra had told me something the night before, and I had filed it away. Strickland opened by establishing a narrative. It was a clean narrative. The prodigal daughter, the absent one, the one who swooped back in during a vulnerable woman's final years and redirected her finances for personal gain. He had bank records, the transfers into my mother's account, printed and highlighted. He had a timeline. He had a letter my mother had written to a friend, years before her diagnosis, saying that she worried about me, that she didn't understand the life I was living, that she sometimes felt I had disappeared from the family entirely. He read that letter aloud. I looked at my hands. He called my brother to the stand. My brother testified about the years he had spent managing our mother's care, the appointments, the medications, the modifications to the house, the nights he and his wife had stayed over when she was frightened. He testified that I had contributed nothing. He testified that he had no idea where the money in her personal account had come from. He said, and I am quoting as accurately as I can remember, "My sister has never held a real job in her life. She told us she worked for the government, but she's never been able to say what she does or show anyone any evidence of it. We always assumed she was embarrassed, that she'd gone to Washington and it hadn't worked out." He said it with something that sounded like sympathy. I did not react. Then Strickland stood up to cross-examine me. I had taken the stand. I was wearing a gray suit. I had not worn jewelry except for one small pin on my lapel, a detail Audra had advised me to keep and which I will come back to. He approached the witness box with the energy of a man who believed the next 20 minutes are going to be the highlight of his career. "Miss Vance," he said, using my mother's maiden name, which I had never legally taken, "can you describe for the court your current occupation?" "I work in federal operations," I said. "Federal operations," he repeated. "Can you be more specific?" "No." He smiled. "You cannot tell this court what you do for a living?" "I cannot disclose the details of my work in this setting," I said. "That is accurate." He nodded slowly, the way people do when they want the jury to see them nodding. "And have you ever filed a tax return under your name that reflects this alleged employment?" "My taxes are filed," I said. "I am not able to provide those documents in an open proceeding." He spread his hands wide, turning slightly toward the jury, which in Millhaven County consisted of 8 people, 4 of whom I recognized from childhood. "So we have no tax returns, no pay stubs, no employer verification, no record of any kind that you have worked a single day in the last 8 years. Is that correct?" "That is not correct," I said. "There are records. They are classified." He let that word hang in the air just long enough to make it sound absurd. "Classified," he said. "In a hardware store inheritance dispute." A few people in the gallery made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I looked at my brother. He was watching me with an expression I had seen on his face since we were children, the particular satisfaction of someone who believes they have finally caught you. Audra did not flinch. She stood when it was her turn and she said, "Your Honor, I have a document I'd like to enter into evidence. It arrived this morning. I'll need to approach the bench." Strickland stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. This is highly irregular." "It is," Audra agreed, pleasantly. "I apologize for the timing. The document required clearances from 2 federal departments before it could be prepared for court. Those clearances came through at 6:17 this morning." There was a murmur. Judge Wexford held out her hand. Audra handed her a sealed envelope, dark blue, not black, but thick, with a federal seal in the upper left corner and a stamp across the front that I could see, even from the witness box, read, "For Jude Egel Re only." The courtroom went very quiet. Judge Wexford broke the seal. She read. She read for longer than I expected, which meant it was more than a summary. Her face did not change exactly, but something shifted behind her eyes. She looked up once, at me, and I saw it, not recognition of my face, but recognition of something else. The small pin on my lapel. She looked back down at the document. Then she set it down on her desk, folded her hands over it, and looked at Strickland. "Counselor," she said in a voice that had gone very quiet, "I'm going to need you to sit down." What happened in the next 40 minutes I will try to describe as accurately as I can, knowing that accuracy has limits. Judge Wexford called a brief recess. She made a phone call from her chambers. I learned this later from Audra. When she returned, she asked the gallery to clear. She asked my father's attorney to approach. She spoke to both attorneys at the bench for a long time, and I watched my brother watching them. Watched the slow deflation happening behind his eyes as Strickland's posture changed, as the confidence leaked out of the way he was standing. When the bench conference ended, Strickland went back to his seat. He did not look at my brother. Judge Wexford addressed the court. She said that the document she had received contained federal verification of my employment history and the source of the financial transfers in question. She said that this information was classified and could not be read into the record, but that it was sufficient to establish, beyond any reasonable dispute, that the funds in my mother's account had originated with me and not, as alleged, been taken from her. She said the case was dismissed. She looked at my brother when she said it. He didn't speak to me in the parking lot. He walked out with his attorney and they stood by Strickland's car for a while, and I could tell from the body language that Strickland was explaining something my brother didn't want to hear. My father came out a few minutes later, slowly, with the careful walk of a man whose hips hurt him. He stopped when he reached me. He was quiet for a long time. I didn't try to fill it. Finally, he said, "I didn't know." "I know," I said. "That you were sending it." "I know, Dad." He looked at the ground. He was wearing his good shoes, the ones he kept for funerals and court apparently. "She should have told me. She was protecting you both from having to feel like you owed me anything," I said. "That was Mom. That's how she did things." He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I touched his arm once, briefly, then I walked to my rental car. Audra found me by the car. She had her briefcase over her shoulder, and she was moving with the precise economy of motion of someone who has more to do today and is already thinking about the next thing. "That went about as I expected," she said. "What's the exposure on his end?" I asked, meaning my brother. "Making a false statement in a legal filing is not nothing," she said. "But proving intent versus recklessness is complicated, and frankly, I think you have better uses for your time than a civil countersuit." I thought about it. "Leave it," I said. She nodded. "That's probably right." She shook my hand and walked to her car. I sat in the driver's seat for a while without turning the ignition. The courthouse was emptying out around me. The fluorescent light I could see through one of the windows was still humming, probably doing its small, invisible work. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. The pin on my lapel caught the afternoon light for a second, a small thing, unassuming. The kind of thing most people would look right past. Most people had for most of my career. That was rather the point. My phone buzzed. A number I recognized. I answered it. "Situation resolved?" the voice asked. "Situation resolved," I said. "Good. We need you in Frankfurt by Thursday." "I'll be there," I said. I started the car. I pulled out of the parking lot of the Millhaven County Courthouse and I drove past the hardware store on the main street. Still open, I noticed. A woman I didn't recognize behind the counter. And I drove past the creek where I used to read as a child. And I drove to the airport. And I did not look back, not because I didn't love any of it, but because there was work to do, and I had always been better at the work than at explaining it. There's something I've thought about a lot since that Tuesday in March. Not the verdict. The verdict was almost beside the point by the time it came. What I keep thinking about is my brother's face when Strickland stopped looking at him. That's the moment it ended, not when the judge spoke. Not when the case was dismissed. It ended when my brother's own attorney turned away from him because Strickland had just read enough in Judge Wexford's expression to understand that the story he'd been selling for the last several months was not going to hold. My brother built that story carefully. He built it over years, really. Every dinner where he mentioned I hadn't called, every conversation at the co-op where he described me as someone who had run away from real life, every implication that my silence about my work was the silence of someone with nothing to show. He believed it. I think that's important to say. He wasn't performing. He had genuinely constructed a version of me that made sense to him, and he had lived inside that version for so long that filing a lawsuit felt, to him, like accountability, like he was finally forcing me to answer for something. What he didn't reckon with was this: the things you don't know about a person are not evidence of what isn't there. They're just evidence of what you haven't been told. I made a choice, a long time ago, not to explain myself, not to my family, not to anyone who wasn't clear to know. That choice had costs I understood going in. People would fill the silence with their own conclusions. Some of those conclusions would be unflattering. I accepted that. It was part of the work, and the work mattered more to me than being understood by people who weren't asking the right questions. But here's what I also knew, and what my brother didn't. A life built on real things doesn't disappear when someone chooses not to believe in it. The transfers I made to my mother's account were real. The work I did for 8 years was real. The evidence of all of it existed, quietly, in places my brother never thought to look because he'd already decided there was nothing to find. That's not luck. That's not fate. That's the plain, unglamorous result of doing the actual thing instead of talking about the actual thing. My mother understood that about me. We never discussed it in those terms, but she knew. She kept our arrangement between us not because she was deceiving my brother, but because she knew that the moment she explained it, it would become about something else. About who got credit, about who sacrificed more, about the old scoreboard that families keep in the back of every room. She wanted the money to just be money. Help, quietly given, quietly received. I used to think her instinct to protect everyone from the full truth was a kind of softness. Sitting in that parking lot afterward, watching my father walk slowly toward his truck, I understood it differently. She wasn't soft. She was precise. She knew exactly what each person in her life could hold, and she gave them only that much. I'd like to be that precise someday. I'm still working on it. What I know for certain is this: the work you do in private does not require an audience to be real. The integrity you maintain when no one is watching is still integrity, and when the moment comes, and in my experience, it always comes, that quiet accumulation of real things will speak for itself, in whatever room it needs to. Audra shook my hand and walked to her car. My father drove home without looking back. My brother stood in a parking lot with a lawyer who was already moving on to his next case, and I drove to the airport with work to do. That's the whole of it.